Welcome to No Password Required. I'm your host, Jack Clabby, a cybersecurity attorney at Carlton Fields, PA in Tampa, Florida. And with me is...
I'm Kaylee Melton, the Director of Community Programs and Events at the Cognitive Security Institute and the Bob Ross of InfoSec.
We just finished a great conversation with Shane Tews. Shane is a non-resident senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. She focuses on cyber privacy and internet governance. She's also the president of Logan Circle Strategies, a strategic advisory firm, also working on internet and cybersecurity issues. Kaylee, what stood out to you the most in the conversation?
I think the thing that stood out to me the most was that people still don't really know who to call when or what to do when they get themselves in a cyber incident. And I think that applies within a lot of organizations, but particularly on the personal, individual, or family level. You don't really know what to do when you have your identity stolen or your information is part of a breach and things like that. There's not a solid helpline that everyone knows that you can call.
Yeah. I think she also shares, she echoes a theme that I talk with a lot of my clients about and other folks in the industry about. When we talk about policy, a lot of times we're talking about laws and regulations passed by federal or state governments, right? But also there's this layer over that in the United States and in other countries of private contract. When a person uses an app or an internet service, they're agreeing to terms of service between them about what's going to happen to their data. And they're going to get disclosures and they have choices. And similarly, if a company or a government is hacked, or they might have obligations to keep certain security standards or obligations to tell folks based on contracts that they signed. So it's not just what the government does, but it's also what private parties do when they're having these, when they're agreeing about what's going to happen with data. So really cool layered discussion we have. You've heard a little bit about what Kaylee and what I took away from this discussion, but let's hear what Shane had to say.
This is No Password Required, a Cyber Florida podcast presented by ThreatLocker.
And we are back. Our guest today is Shane Tews. Shane, welcome to No Password Required.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So Shane, we're going to talk today a little bit about your role and about how you got to kind of where you are. But one thing that interests us is kind of you were exposed pretty early on to high-level policy stuff. You were in the George H.W. Bush White House. How did your time in the White House shape your understanding of technology policy and its long-term impact?
So I was very lucky, really just right out of college. I worked for the first Bush administration. And when I moved, I was over with the Secretary of Transportation, which was fantastic. I still talk to all those people 2 years, for 2 years. Then I moved to the White House. And when I got there, the office I was in was called the Office of Cabinet Affairs. And they had a cabinet report that they did every week that was a look back and a look ahead. That was the primary audience was the president, but then other people read it. And when I got there, they were retyping the reports. And I was like, hey, there's this thing called a modem. Let's check it out. And they said, no, this is the White House. We can't do that. That would cause a security breach. And I was like, you know what? I just had to find one person to be like, let's give it a go. So I plugged in the modem. Everybody eventually agreed to it except for the Department of Defense and I think the Department of Justice. And so we worked around that. But I mean, I was just like, and so it was a thing that would start on Wednesday. I would have to curate these, my colleagues when they came in, and then we would. The one that's so funny in hindsight was the Office of Science and Technology Policy, which is so prominent today. OSTP would always send these huge reports about cool stuff they were doing, but this particular administration, no one was really ready for that, and we would get it down to a paragraph, like those 5 pages. I always felt bad with them. I was like, oh, those poor OSTP guys. It's so hard.
Computers, important. Internet, who knows?
So I left there and went to Capitol Hill and just saw, this was still it was PCs on the desktop. And then eventually went to another job and then went to work for a company called Verisign that runs the domain name addressing system .net and .org. And this was in 2001. And it really was, I was the first person to go to the Hill and explain to Capitol Hill and explain the internet to a lot of people. And they would just sort of blank stare at me, a lot of them. And I'd just hand them my business card and say, if this comes up, just feel free to reach out. And like 2 years later, people would call me and be like, hey, you're that internet girl who came in. Like, I have a problem now. Can we talk about it? And it's funny because people still, like, I'll run into people and they'll be like, I was a junior legislative correspondent and you came in and like explained the internet to us. So it wasn't that I had any background in, I'm not an engineering by training, but I spent a lot of time with them. And I just was, the main thing about doing the kind of work I do is asking a lot of the right questions. If you can get there, or at least asking a lot of questions, you get to the right question. And I learned a tremendous amount. But the key thing was really understanding what the those we now would think of them as guardrails, but the borders of what technology could and couldn't do. And there was every once in a while, and we still run into this in legislation. We're seeing this with some of the child online safety laws or the proposed legislation is they just want things to, it's like, that's actually interference in a parent-child relationship. Have you tried the settings? So it's been a really interesting path to get to where I am. I feel very fortunate, but yes, early on, it was very analog to answer a long answer to your question, very analog.
But it's that mixing of, we've all kind of experienced it, and a lot of our audience has too, where you're there to talk about something that has to do with technology, and then people also assume you're the person who can also run the technology, right? Like, about internet policy, but hey, here's a modem,
You're the help desk. I'm definitely the help desk for every person above me and my family. Actually, when I go out to Colorado, where my dad's side of the family's from, it was a joke because my aunt and my uncle would be over there. I'd be like, I'd walk in the door from the airport and say, just get all your phones, lay them out. Nobody changed their password since last time I was there. I would just dial in and I said, I'm not talking to you until we update. And like, I would update all of their phones. And then I would say, now what's the problem?
Is that, going back to the early days of internet policy, right? Not necessarily the use of modems by the White House, but the actual policy that they were starting to put together. What was that era getting right? And maybe what was it getting wrong that you're sort of happy didn't get pulled through?
Well, the main thing that actually I was party to, but not actually in the White House when it happened, is a lot of credit to the Clinton administration. It's around the advent of the internet coming online and deciding that the government should not be the center of how that would work. That they created the multi-stakeholder process, which is trying to bring every level in. So you have the people that architected the main stuff, which was really cool. I've gone out of my way to meet like every person who, was with TCP/IP and HTTP, and then the bringing in the civil society, people to think about freedom of expression. And in ICANN, they have something called the non-commercial users constituency, which means they don't necessarily have money at stake, but they have skin in the game, is the way I think about that group. And then intellectual property, things like the movie studios. Early on, we went through the whole thing with the, eventually recording artists with, different things there. And so it was a lot of, how we got the policy right was trying to figure out how hands off we could be. And to this day, though, I would say you want to legislate or regulate the outcome, not the input. So it's very important that you look at the goal is something that you're trying to change, most likely behaviorally, but you are not doing that via hard edge. Here's what we think the technology should or shouldn't do, because as we've seen, especially now, right, we're going to blow right past whatever those things are in the regs. And if they get cemented in, it's very hard. It takes a long time to break that up to get to where we are in current technology.
That's exactly right. Like specific standards of conduct that sit in regs that take 18 months to create, and then you're stuck with them for 10 years, even though the technology's moved on. Yeah,
we've definitely seen that in areas. I mean, luckily we got part of encryption right, but now they're trying to break that. So it's really fast. Some of them are really hard to move on. I mean, and there's, you think about, I'm going to drop his name at the moment, but the first gentleman who went to prison over something that Trump ended up pardoning him. I can't give his name because what he did seemed so obscene at the time, but now it's like something that's kind of like not that. We don't disprove of it as much.
Right. Yesterday's conduct is today's norms in some degree about internet behavior, for sure. One of the things that comes up, I'm a cybersecurity lawyer. And so it's one thing that comes up from time to time is what the standard is when a company is breached. Yep. Right. And there are 50 states now, and there's 50 standards. Some of them are close to each other. Some of them are identical. Some of them are different. What do have you ever looked at the idea of this sort of one federal standard or one community standard we all agree to kind of harmonize what's going on here for this? Is that something you've ever looked at or have an opinion on?
Yeah, I've actually spent a lot of time on that. When I was at Verisign, we were a lot of the people I worked with worked on creating what they call the Information Technology Information ISAC, Information Sharing Advisory Council. And the main reason why you have an ISAC, especially in the tech space, is for that indemnification on liability. So you want to be able to share information. We're definitely learning this again with the advent of Mythos with Anthropic, is how fast can I get this information out there so other people don't suffer the same harm that I might have been through. However, I don't want to make public a lot of the information that might come out with that initial breach response because it would be harmful, either to your constituents or your clients or to the actual system. So there's always a fine line, but I think in the bookends of my head years ago, I was at an event with this lovely woman from Lithuania who was in cyber, and she goes, "I don't understand you guys. We can report in 4 hours." And I'm like, you can walk across the country in a day, I mean, I love that you guys are that organized, but also, you get in it's Estonia too is another one. Actually, it's still the corner case of, when the Russians attacked Estonia, that they went fully digital with their government, and they're very, they did it very cleanly, and we like to look at them as a model, but they can get a very fast reporting mechanism because a lot of their legal constructs are in alignment. We have so many legacy issues, as I'm sure you're aware of with the legal work you're on. One thing that came up with the advent of this challenge that we've seen around the Department of Homeland Security on the cybersecurity, the organization they call CISA, and the holding up of the reauthorization of CISA, is I was talking to one of the lawyers and said, for one of the big companies, he said, does your company know that they're currently not covered while CISA is in this limbo state? They've lost that liability protection. And she's like, no one's brought it up. I was like, that's fascinating.
That's incredible. Yeah. So tell us a bit about what you're doing now. What is the American Enterprise Institute for those of us listeners who don't know what it is? And can you share a bit about what you do there?
Sure, absolutely. So the American Enterprise Institute, or as most people like to call it, just AEI, has two sides of the house. We have foreign and defense policy, which is what a lot of people know AI for. It's a real strong house. I spend time in the cybersecurity space, but I don't do the hardened elements of that. Even though there's a lot of crossover, especially now on when we look at trade law and the fact that the internet doesn't have borders. So the foreign policy, and I spend a lot of time on that as well. But I'm actually on what is considered the economic, the econ side of the house. And so I'm working on technology policy. I cover a vast area, which is fascinating. Most of the people, I kind of say I ride the top of the wave. I figure out enough to try to be helpful, where a lot of people I deal with are very, very deep on these individual topics. So I'll give you a quick rundown. So we talked about cybersecurity, tech and trade, artificial intelligence, which is eating the world right now, data protection, which we refer to often as privacy, but I think of it as data protection. We can legislate and regulate. Privacy is more of an emotion about how you feel about your information. Encryption is becoming very hot. We're having some challenges with Canada right now on encryption. Broadband deployment was much more of a conversation under the Biden administration, where they were trying to spend a lot of money to see who we needed to finish out that connection loop, which the Trump administration is finally getting that money out the door, and I think we've connected everybody. I think we've done a pretty that's kind of a joke, but I think we've gotten there. And then the whole network stack. So chips and memory are getting the real highlight right now. But I really follow kind of every element of the network stack and how that gets pulled together. So, and then all the elements of policy that go into those things.
When it comes to cybersecurity policy in particular, what are some of the misunderstandings that you're seeing now from organizations and stakeholders?
So going back to Mythos, the thing I think is a net positive there is a lot of this has been broken because of the way we layer onto legacy systems and we kind of buy the new shiny thing. It's kind of like clothes in your closet, right? You buy the new shiny thing and it's in the front of the closet and you wear it a lot. And every once in a while you have to dig at the bag. You're like, I forgot about that. And that is so often the case with, what we think of as you've got vendor debt. You've got all these different ways that your system gets into technical debt. And a lot of that is just, it doesn't get updates is the biggest problem. Is people stop updating it, but yet your system's still attached to it. And those are very easy fulcrum points for bad guys to come in and lay in wait. They might get in there, they'll wait a little bit so they're not too obvious, and then they slowly overtake your system. So the idea of Mythos being able to, and other companies have things that are just not getting so much attention, is that it's really shined like a black light on a lot of these flaws. And now there's an obligation by these companies, especially under their contracts with their clients, in the both not only in the consumer but in the enterprise space, that they need to patch those. They need to fix those things. And they some of them it's like in the government. We have certain departments that we have people that are like, they speak language but it's code, because nobody knows how to like update from A to where we need to get to go. So that's a lot of it, is just trying to figure out what it is that you have in front of us. I'm a big Apple consumer, so I'm very disciplined about my updates. I did one last night. A lot of people just don't think about that, and they don't understand why the technology is not doing what they want it to do to function. So we need to keep, as consumers of it, it's good to stay a little sharp, but you also, if you have an IT department, they need to also have the budget to be able to do that, because a lot of times that's the problem. And I think a lot of C-suite attention on this issue in the last month will hopefully get people so they can get their whole system, up and in shape.
So my career has been a lot about trying to talk to your average everyday person about cybersecurity and why it's important to do X, Y, or Z, why they need a good password or need to use multi-factor and things like that. I'm curious, from your perspective, what is the gap you see between how much everyday people think they're protected versus how exposed they actually are?
I'm going to take it. Some of it's a little, and this is probably more on a personal level. I see it's generational. I'm now managing my mom's finances, and because a lot of her accounts are attached to her cell phone, I have put multi-factor authentication on anything that's financially oriented. So I have to have her next to me with her phone, and I bring my computer out and like have lunch, and I'm like, Mom, let's do the bills. Let's go through all this stuff. And then she'll walk away with her phone. I'm like, Mom, I need your phone. She can't understand. Like, what does my phone have to do with this? And I'm like, yeah, so there's a whole era of people that are never going to come online the way we'd like to about this. They just don't quite understand it, right? And then there's others that just don't understand what's at risk. And I don't know that we'll ever be able to change this paradigm, but the idea of you give away so much information and you don't realize that it's valuable to someone because they're willing to steal it. They sell it to each other, with third-party vendors and even the initial first-party intaker of the information. And if we can ever change that dynamic so it has a better, even if it's a micropayment attached to it, I think people would pay much more attention to the kind of information that they flow into the system, where it goes. And I'm one who I actually read the terms of service and terms of use. And, I've always said, and I've talked to the app association who has no interest in doing this, but I'm like, we need the apps to show up with like 3 emojis or whatever they are that tell me, like, right up front, I sell to third parties. Like, so I just know that. I might be fine with that, but I would want to know it before having to get to page 36. And then, the other things about, what am I giving access to? There's so many times, and a little bit got fixed when Apple did their update with, they called it AT&T. I can't remember what it stood for, but now every time something asks for permission, it needs to ask permission because I put that in my settings for the camera, my contacts, my calendar. The reason why some of those are important just aren't natively to how people think about these. One of the big attack spectrums right now is calendar invites, which it breaks my heart because I love getting a click through when I'm invited to something to just be able to drop that on my calendar. But apparently so do the criminals who realize that that's generally not, once you're at that level, you've gotten and if you permissioned all this, and then they can get in there, then they use that to, get into your network. So, it's hard because it's also a moving target. So as I'm sure like you're always trying to explain the most important things. People are getting the scam calls. They're starting realizing, as I tell my mother, the bank is not calling you. They're not going to. How often does the bank call? Not often, Mom. So don't like hang up and tell them that you're going to call them back and then call me. That's what we end up doing.
Yeah. What is the biggest disconnect between this reality of what's happening for people, everyday people on the ground, and the world of cybersecurity policy?
I think the fact that, in a little bit going to Jack's earlier question, there's so much at stake, and it isn't inherently obvious to people, so they bypass a lot of the native security elements. We're seeing this actually in the European Commission has just an open comment period right now, but it's really focused on Android, but it involves anybody who has an operating system, saying that you have to give permission. You have to give permission for anybody to have access to everything that's going on in the operating system. And when that happens, you end up breaking those levels of trust that most consumers have learned about their phone. So they tend not to, they think it's pre-permissioned. So they've done this before, that they don't realize now that these apps are going to come in, and, whatever it is that they've decided that they need to have, access to, the reason why I give my location is because I'm a big user of Google Maps, or I want Uber to be able to use it, but I don't necessarily want any person who happens to have an app that I download have my location information. So, we've got to figure that out. And it's one of those challenges that tech has sort of created for itself, because it's so user friendly and we're used to plug and play that we don't have to explain how things work. But now that they're breaking that trust cycle, we're going to have to go back and explain, when you make these decisions to go out of the basic network of where you've normally gone to get these things, be very cautious and thoughtful about what it is that you're putting on your phone and what they're going to do with it. An example is, and I don't know, it kind of weirds me out, and I love the fact that Instagram knows this about me, but I'm one of those people that goes to museums and I take a picture of the art, and then I take a picture of the little tag next to it so I can remember the name of the painting. And there's an app for that. And Instagram serves it up to me, and they're like, there's an app when you go, and it'll just do this for you. And at first I'm like, oh, didn't realize I had a problem that I needed to solve there, but if I wanted to, problem solved. And then I'm like, what else does the app do? So I went and looked it up, and it's a little squishy on what happens, because I'm like, a lot of these are just truly Trojan horses. You put them on your phone, and there's weather apps that do this. All they do is suck information off your phone and sell it to a third party. And people just, I showed my phone to a person of mine who's she's like, here's 5 things you got to get off your phone right away. And it wasn't even for a cybersecurity thing. She was doing it from a privacy perspective. So that, I think, is the key. That's where, Jack, you asked earlier about, the 50 laws. That's the one challenge I think we have, where we really would be better off with a national privacy bill. It's just tough, because your phone, I live in I cross the border into Virginia or to Maryland. I do a lot of state hopping, and my phone is going to have a very hard time changing the permissions every time I drive 15 miles, to all of a sudden have different things that it has to remember. And a lot of times I like the settings that I want. I don't want to have to go through the permission of that every time, I move around, as well as we get into the challenges, especially with where the European laws and the California laws have kind of dictated to the rest of the world how this is going to go. So kind of taking to heart the challenges that we have with consumers, let's think about that. House Energy and Commerce Committee in Congress is working on a bill right now that I've made some comments on. And the key thing is, I think that the privacy is very important, but the security part is as important, because those two things have to go hand in glove.
Can we talk to, just pivot to government cybersecurity readiness too? Because that's something that Cyber Florida follows a fair amount. I mean, if a major cyber attack hit some critical infrastructure tomorrow, right? Do you think that governments are ready to respond to it? What do you see about government readiness at this point?
No, and it has to be almost kind of like, I'm going to say, Tews. You guys are in Florida, so I'm sure you do a lot of like hurricane drills or things. I'm from the Midwest, so we did tornado drills, right? I know what it feels like when a tornado's coming on. Like it gets very calm. The color of the sky changes, and if you don't see these things coming forward, you don't know how to immediately protect yourself in a situation. And that's very similar to that. A lot of people don't know that they've been breached. They don't have even the moat created to make sure that their systems are not in play. And then they don't know what to do about it. And that's both from a business and as an individual user. Something happens, you don't know who to talk to. Do I call the police? Do I call the FBI? Who am I supposed to engage on this? So having a plan, especially for corporations, and having that plan well known, even if it's the best thing you do is don't do anything yourself, but contact the IT department as soon as possible and contain where you think the problem is so it doesn't spread quickly. And for consumers, there's, kind of learning those key points as well. I know October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, so I write about it a lot then. Not that most people know that they're supposed to celebrate that in October, but it's, an idea to put all those reminders back out there, like things that people just need to be cognizant of. And right now it's more text messaging driven than it is, email still harbors the most malware, but, now text messaging is kind of causing that same problem because everybody's on their mobile device.
How do the US and the EU approaches to tech policy differ in ways that matter?
That's a really good question. We are an innovation society, so we believe in allowing people to go forward. Their measurement is if you do something that seems to make sense, somebody will fund you. And so we have kind of that market value driven that is in the way that our tech works. And that's actually why we're doing so well in the United States versus other countries. We'll set China aside because they get kind of self-funded by the government. But the idea is if it makes sense, a lot of these venture capitalists know that, 8 out of 10 may fail, but the 2 that they do are going to do very well. And our system is designed for that. There was a report that came out, I think it's probably 4 or 5 years now ago, called the Draghi report, that this gentleman in Europe really pointed this out. And he said, we need to change our banking system, which seems odd when you're like, what's wrong with tech? And the problem with tech for Europe is their banking system. They don't have that same innovative cycle in the way that they finance things. And so it's very hard to get funding. So that's why you see a lot of these company founders either moving to the United States or selling to larger companies in the United States. So that's part one. The second part, besides the lack of funding opportunities, is they believe in it's a nanny state. They like you to ask permission before you move forward with things. And a long time ago, when we were working on RFID tagging, I was in a meeting in Brussels, and they were explaining to me that this wood table we were meeting around, because it had an RFID tag on it, it would be considered RFID hazardous waste. And I was like, it's a wood table. Why wouldn't you recycle this wood table? And they're like, because it has this electronic thing out here on the corner now, deems for it to be. And so I always take that as kind of a visual in my head, because now it's a virtual version of that, where they're saying you have to do all these permissive things ahead of time, and you have to discuss it with us, either with the nation state or the European Commission or a member of the European Union before you move forward. And I'm like, that's a lot of regulatory hurdles. I might go do something else. First of all, I can't get the funding. And then you're going to mother may I into how I have to manage all these things. And they now want that for American companies. And their way of discipline is funding. That's why you see these astronomical fines that they're doing for what they call the Magnificent Seven. That's the only way that they are getting attention, because with these smaller fines, they were like, these are a nuisance, but it's a risk that we take in being in business. And now they're like, whoa, these numbers are huge, and we didn't do anything wrong. Well, all we did was service your clientele in Europe, and now you don't like that because you don't have companies that do the same thing, which goes back to the banking problem, right? So there's a full cycle that needs to be fixed in Europe, and it isn't that they're not smart enough to have great tech. They need to get their own barriers out of the way so they can compete against us or any other place that they wish to compete against.
Do you feel the U.S. is leading on tech policy or reacting at this point?
Depending on where you're looking at the stack, I'd say a little of both. We're still very much leading in, in artificial intelligence, I guess would be like the best way to, look at it is we look at what happened with the Chinese, and, there's the whole idea that DeepSeek, came to the market with very little capital investment. And that was a false narrative, because the company that started it actually had built their own network operation and server system for they basically had a version of a venture capital fund. And then they built DeepSeek on the back of that. So they just discounted the almost $1 billion worth of compute they had beforehand. They just didn't put that on the ledger. And then they said, oh, look, we did this for just a couple $1 million. And you're like, well, not really. You had to buy the CPUs, the GPUs, the data centers, energy, all that was not in the equation. But what they did was their distillation model, where they also just sort of grabbed a lot of smart technology that was going on at the time. And we've seen a lot of stories in the last couple months where there's one of them, it doesn't matter, I think it was Quinn, but they asked, if you ask it, it thinks it's Claude. because it is trained on so much Claude material that if it's like, oh, no, I'm Claude. And you're like, you're not Claude. You're a dupe, and to put it in girl parlance when it comes to those things. So it's an interesting situation because, again, with that idea of we're investment forward, we're innovation forward, but we're competing with the Chinese in an environment where, the government picks winners and they choose, they tell people how they want that money invested in, their whole system is different than ours, but they definitely pick a horse and they give it money to run, right? And we saw that back in the network operation days of with Huawei. And now we have this challenge where we kind of gave the Chinese a lot of things that we just didn't want to do. We were happy to do the innovation cycle, but when we look at chips, that's why TSMC in Taiwan is still the number one chip manufacturers. They chose to become experts in this, and they are amazing at what they do. And we can do some of that in the United States, but not at the level of expertise that we see going on in Taiwan. Chinese are doing very well, but they can basically, what they do is they brute force. They don't necessarily have this small size, but they can put multiple items together like chips or whatever, memory elements that allow them to have the same compute power. And it sometimes the reason why we wouldn't do something like that in the United States is it becomes very energy power hungry, and they just don't have those same barriers to entry than we do. So we're not really working in, I hate the phrase level playing field. I feel like people only say that when they're losing, but they is like, we're not starting at same, right? We have all these different variables and levers that put us in possibly a disadvantage. If you want to look at that, it's like a foot race, but the Americans are really the ones that are coming up with these amazing, innovative elements. But the other thing we've seen is that China has done they emulate a lot of things. They came over here and really studied our education system as to why so many people in China they didn't have these things coming out of their decades of communism. And they've now emulated the Ivy League in a lot of places. And so there's very prominent places to go to school in China now. So while we're setting up these barriers to entry to bring in this very high level talent that used to come here to the United States, now they're happy to stay in China in a lot of cases. They have an education system that is just as strong in the areas that they're interested in. So we have to add that to the equation.
Sticking with AI a bit, you've written about AI features shifting from AI features to AI coordination. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, the moving from just the fascinating with the romance with the learning language models, which I think I'm probably still stuck in that phase. I'm just having so much fun with it. Into the agentic and having the bots that can all connect with each other. You're definitely from a cybersecurity perspective, we need to think about where we're putting the layers of permission. And the number thing that gets people's attention is you give it a version of a credit card. Like how much credit are you not in token credit, but in if you say plan a trip to Germany, and are you going to let this agentic agent have a $10,000 limit or a zero limit, or there's lots of things that kind of come into play there that we don't have the mechanisms. Which part of that is regulation, because now you're asking the financial institutions to come to the table about how we're going to manage these. Good news is that has gotten the attention of the JP Morgan Chase, the different, Cap ones. They're all very interested in this and would like to see that we can use the current financial system to partner with the agentic AI agents. But then there's a whole nother world that says banking's old school and we need to work around that. So it's a really interesting area to watch. The other thing is, again, that the permissions that we talked about, it's, I've set up I'll set up something on my system and then I'll let it run in the background. And then sometimes I'm like, wait, what's going on? Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot I said yes to that. So, as we want it to be our own personal assistants and do all this work, or, create these task bots inside, organizations, there's a lot of upside to that, but you needs to go in with a risk analysis of, when and where should you be able to safety wall something off or not give everybody that's there permission to do things. Longstanding, thing in cyber is the people that tend to do the most damage are the ones that are leaving. And so you have to be very careful about, as people walk out the door, that you cabin off their, their permissions on systems, because a lot of times they just don't turn them off.
Right. And how many agents did they have running, right? If it's a big consulting firm or something, and it's one person and they have 4 agents working for them, and they leave and no one turns off the agentic identities, they're still running.
Yeah, and that goes back to what I was talking about with the vendor debt and the technical debt is you have exactly that, and you're like, and then the next guy comes in and they don't leave the recipe on what they did, and so they either decide to like trash all of that, and so that's just that sunk cost out the door, or you're not able to like layer into it. So there's lots of things that need to be thought through at the IT level. Again, it's that plug and play that makes it seem so easy and seamless, but you have to think about both the risk and the cost on that.
All right, as we look forward to the next 10 years or so, what's one thing you think policymakers really have to get right?
I think we need to be cautious, but not step in the way of progress with artificial intelligence. I think we are really at a change agent moment. I think what it allows us to do is think at a whole nother level on multiple things. And I think we're just scratching the surface because humans like everything to be about themselves. It's just our nature. So everything that you want out of AI right now is still much 360 focus on you or your family, or what can you do. The idea of how we bring this on societally to like just a lot of things that can be automated that may feel at the beginning. I mean, the calculator is always the easiest example, right? Like everybody's like, no, you can't just type this in. My kid won't know how to do math. And now we think nothing of the fact that, you can do all this, you get in your spreadsheet and you do a lot of math things, and the spreadsheet is, the problem would be if the spreadsheet's wrong, then you would stop, trusting it. But we haven't gotten to that level with AI where we have a trust like we do with the calculator, and we're like, it's going to always give us the right answer. And but it's also good to know the how you get from A to B. And so we also have to do, especially looking at students in education, making sure that it's not that you just want the answer, you want to know why you're asking the question. So there's a lot of layers on that one. And I'm seeing, going back to the question about 10 years, very cautious, understand parents are concerned about this and that their kids are being educated and learning, but what they're doing is they're cabining off the resources of bringing more compute into the classroom. And I think that needs to be thought about in a different way. I mean, that what it's doing is these kids are going to show up on the job market not having the skill sets that they need to be, in a place where they can really succeed.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a short break now. When we return, Shane will go through our lifestyle polygraph. So stay with us.
You're listening to the No Password Required podcast. We cover cybersecurity and a lot of other stuff.
Welcome back. As many of you know, the lifestyle polygraph is a test used by the federal government to determine if a person is worthy of learning some of our nation's most important secrets. Here, we use this technique for slightly lower stakes to determine whether our guests can join our fantasy cybersecurity squad. Shane, are you ready for the lifestyle polygraph?
I'm willing to participate. I don't know if I'm ready.
Good answer. All right, first question. Have you ever pulled an all-nighter just for a project you were excited about, not because it was required?
It's been a long time since I've done that, but I can remember the time I did it, and it was in college. So it's been a long time.
I've heard some people who, like when they move into a new apartment or a new house or something, they stay up until all the boxes are unpacked and all the art is on the walls. And I've never done that. I mean, I've lived in my current house for 13 years and I think I still have boxes packed. Are you an unpack the boxes person, Shane?
Well, if you have boxes you haven't unpacked, you should probably just throw them away and not look at them. It's like, but yeah. I do eventually unpack them all, but I don't always do it in that. Yeah, I know the people you're talking about, and I'm not one of them. But yes, eventually everything should get in its place and out of the box.
I admire that. Are you inbox zero on your email inbox, kind of similar thing, or do you let it accumulate?
I have, okay, well, it's on my phone. I pretty much have 20,000 emails is normal for me. And I have 8 different email accounts for different reasons. And there's one that I try to get it down because it's like there'll be things hidden in there that I have to find. Okay. But they're all on different operating systems, which was very frustrating.
That's something I would like to try. I have not tried the agentic, like an Outlook agentic, to go through my current 8,400 emails and say, hey, which of these should I probably have responded to? I would like to try that.
Slightly different thing, but on the same idea is with, I love my Gmail account because you can now, like I did a trip and I said, go through and create an itinerary. And because I use Gmail for all those things, I only had to change like one word. It had my entire itinerary. It had all of my record locator numbers, just all from the Gmail account. I can't say I can do that on some of the others.
Yeah. No, it plays nicely. That's exactly right. Yeah. And I think like that has been one area where in my personal life, I have been playing around with the different kinds of AI is trip planning. It's so far so good because it's just doing the thing that I would have done, like looking through TripAdvisor reviews for restaurants and finding out what time museums open up. I know the path it's taking and it's the same path I would take. So I'm okay with trusting it for some of that stuff. But I've been harder on more nebulous work tasks to trust the AI agent because I don't know the path it would be taking.
I was just out at the Google Developers Conference, and the thing that's coming out is something called Spark. And it's going to be a tiered thing. So it's $100 a month for a while. And like everything, it'll migrate down. Eventually us peons will be able to use it. But it is wanting to keep you inside the Google ecosystem, which I'm fine with. I opt in. But it's really going voice to the Google system. So all these examples on stage were plan my weekend. Somebody was having a block party. So, here's the 5 things I need to get done. Make sure you give a list, blah, 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 blah. And they all had these but it was a lot of offloading life. And I've been fortunate to be at the Google I/O several times. This is the first time where I felt like, okay, all these executives like got a hold of these toys inside the lab. And they're like, I can really use that. And now can it order me a bouncy house? And I need a rental car. Right? And I'm like, that's real life. Like those are things that we do need to get done. And if they can get done more efficient, we can do other things that we like to do or they're better. So no, but to answer yourself, I can't get to a 0 box. I can't. I'd love to.
Okay. Question number 2. When someone tells a bad joke in a meeting, do you fake a laugh or just stare at them?
I probably fake a laugh. Yeah. Just to be polite. I'm from the Midwest.
That's true.
We do, yeah.
There are definitely times when, right, it's not an offensive joke where I'm trying to make a point or stand up for a principle. It's just, I want this interaction to end. And the easiest way for it to end is for me to give a dry ha.
You're especially a lot of we're probably both around a lot of people that are very smart and sensitive.
That's a great observation.
Conversation about something that they're like, okay, I'll just politely laugh at your joke, and then can we move on?
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Or someone who's beginning, like someone got coaching that they need to begin a conversation with a joke, and for them it's just they're just trying, they're moving on, and then they go.
Because they don't have any inherent human skills to know how to even launch that. That's yeah.
My kids gave me, because I think they know the humor I have, they gave me for Father's Day last year these cards that are dad jokes.
Okay.
And so I had been using them. This is the one that popped up. This is, people keep telling me I'm addicted to brake fluid. People keep telling me I'm addicted to brake fluid, but I can stop anytime I want. Right? Like that's bad. Wow. That's a good example of the social laugh you guys both gave me though.
I want to know if it's like Cards of Humanity. Are you like adding to the deck now?
If I have a good one, I write, I would tell that joke slightly different there. Here, so I could tell it as a one-liner. But
that was Cards Against Humanity. Yeah, get that correct.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no good. Exactly.
Okay. 3rd question. Do you ever talk to yourself when planning or problem solving? And if yes, is it serious self-talk or more like a running commentary?
I have a running commentary in my head at all times. I mean, it doesn't stop. The one thing I always tell myself, I don't really want to write an entire show, but I could do treatments if I could just watch a scenario unroll in front of me. And then I keep going in my head, like, here's 6 ways you could make that really funny if you did a version of this. Yes, the voice in my head is very busy.
Have you ever thought about fiction writing, Shane? Have you ever done any fiction writing? Or, I mean, you've seen so many things, you could probably inform a whole lot of stuff.
So in a very baby version of this, 2 things have collided in my world. I'm very lucky that Google has put me on a team to to test some of their AI tools. And there's certain things I am not great at. I'm not an overly creative person. And it's the Google Omni, which just came out, it's basically voice to visual. So you can ask it to do things. And so they've asked me to test it. Actually, I've got a thing with the tester team tomorrow. And the first time they asked me if I could just ask it really bad things and try to break it. And I was not mean enough to try to break the AI. And then this one, I say it's two things because I got that opportunity to do this because I have permission into the system. But I a lot of times on my social media, I put that it's used to be hashtag. Now I just say Shane on a plane. And it's because I do get the fortune. I love to travel, and I do get to travel a lot for work, but I don't always tell people where I'm going. But people, it just is it's a conversation starter. Like it came the event I was at last night. Somebody said, "Oh, you're not on a plane," and then I know that I'm they're also on my social media feed, which isn't. I'm very permissive, so a lot of people on my social media feed. So I've taken the Shane on a plane. A friend of mine said, I have a lot of nieces and nephews that I have to read books to, and why don't you just write when you go? Like just do top 5 things when you're in Berlin or Tokyo or. I just the one I'm working on using the Google Omni is Shane on a train and doing the Cradle of Liberty tour, starting in Boston and then going all the way down to Williamsburg. And what's been interesting about that is just creating the concept and what I as an adult would like to read to my nieces and nephews, because we both learn. And then doing the Omni part of it it's interesting to see what it retains and what it can change and what it holds. With the name Shane, most people think I'm a boy, so it immediately makes me a boy. And then I talk to it and we make it into something else. And then like what it's willing to kind of move through or not. So it's been a fun, multitasking way of me to learn more about AI, but also do my thing of not fiction, but children's books, if I ever get there.
Creativity, getting an outlet out.
Yeah, I love that so much. Sort of related, question number 4. Is there a type of music, show, or movie that you secretly love, but people might not expect?
So I got to Breaking Bad really late and loved it. And you wouldn't necessarily know that from my personality. I'm just finishing Peaky Blinders, which I know I'm late on that one, but my sister keeps talking about it. And there's like one left in this season, and I just don't want to watch it because I don't want it to be over.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Yeah. But I know they have another season coming. I watched The Bear because so a lot of things I won't even know about till they win an Emmy or a Golden Globe. And I'm like, okay, The Bear is so, I don't know if you've watched it, it makes you anxious. There's so much stuff going on. And the arc on the characters are really interesting. So they get to the very end, and you don't know at the end of this that they did announce another season, but the last thing is it could be a play. It is so well done. It is 3 in the very last moment. There's 4 characters that are in the back of this restaurant. And this guy, Richie, plays a full arc, and he brings up singularity, which there's no way at the beginning Richie would have known anything about singularity. But I went back and watched the whole thing again, because now that you know what happens, you can watch it without that angst of it all is going to go crashing down. And it's really good. Like it's just a fantastic show. So, those are, and I know I could spend that same amount of time watching a movie, but somehow I just get sucked into that Netflix vortex, and you just.
Some of these things are so good, and the care that's put into them is better than a lot of movies that are out there now, right? Some of these hour-long dramas now, particularly on some of the streaming services, are the investment level in them too, and the work product is so good.
Yeah, and it's nice. Like when Apple came in, they do everything. It's a quality product, and so they've upped the game. And so there's a lot of things that were just, some of the streaming services are just buying old series. But I get it. There's it's super low capital investment for them and high return. But the shrinking that Apple, which I didn't know was going to end. And it was nice. They kind of tied everything into a bow, but it was a really nice end of the day. Like it was happy. Like it was, you started to really like some of these characters that were quirky. So that's fun.
Oh, it's great.
Okay. Final question. If you were on a reality or game show, which one do you think you'd totally dominate?
I'm totally going to dodge on this question because I don't watch reality TV at all. I get it right away. Like I've Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. Liked it first season. Didn't care about the second season. Brent, the Runway one with Heidi Klum. Like I got it for one season. Like second season couldn't care. Cooking shows. Why these people want to be yelled at by a chef? I don't get it.
It's probably would think a beautiful thing and ruin it. I don't. The cooking shows I've never done.
I don't watch them. As a kid, I did watch more game shows. My sister really wanted to go on Family Feud. And she got us through the first level. Like we did the interview and then they didn't pick my family, but we were like, none of us wanted to do it except for she. It was like, okay, we'll do the interview.
My father was on the $64,000 pyramid or whatever it was early on.
$100,000, wasn't it? Yeah.
That was what it was. And I think he won enough. He was a grad student at the time, and I think he won enough on the show to like pay the copay for my older sister's birth. I think that was it. And he got a year's supply, I think, of Shasta Cola. That was it. That's our own life.
Generous family man, because I probably would have bought a car at that age.
That's right. Whatever he does, whatever it was. So I'll get that details when I'm seeing him in a week or two. I'll get the details again. But I've never gotten far enough on something like that. I'm similar to you, Shane, where I'll watch when there's a new hook on a reality show. I might watch the first couple episodes, but once you see the hook, I don't kind of understand coming back for season 2. I think the hook's kind of cool, but
I can actually come up with better things in that head that's talking to me all the time. I'm like, let me rewrite the end of this.
Yes, exactly. All right, Jack, what do you think? Does Shane have what it takes to join our fantasy cybersecurity squad?
She does. And Shane, I don't believe we have any policy fellows on our cybersecurity squad at this time. So you will have the entire landscape.
Wow.
Fantasy cyber squad to play with as you need. You can set our policy recommendations for our fantasy cyber squad.
Do you say that lightly? Next thing you know, you're going to be like, what's this outline?
Exactly. Wait a minute. Hang on.
Why did you say this to me?
Well, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. If our listeners want to connect with you out there, see more about what you're doing, how can they find you and how can they do that?
So AEI.org is our think tank's website, and we have a section on technology policy every day. It's not always me. I have about 10 other scholars that I work with that are fantastic in what they do. But we also have techpolicydaily.com, a sub area in that. And then I'm at, shane.tews@aei.org. It's one of those emails I can never get down to 0. So go ahead and add yourself into there and see what I have to what we can talk about.
Throw it into the mix. I like it.
So at Shane Tews on the X. And I love a good LinkedIn check. If somebody ever wants to link in, happy to do that.
Excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of our show. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. For the entire No Password Required team, I'm Jack Clappy, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for listening to the No Password Required podcast, presented by ThreatLocker. No Password Required is produced by Cyber Florida, and a special shout out goes to our friends at Carlton Fields and Reality Shift. For more content, follow us on social media at NoPasswordPod and visit our website at cyberflorida.org/pod.